Hi, I'm Hilary Russo. Thanks for joining me for the HIListically Speaking podcast. I'm a certified holistic health coach and havening techniques practitioner, lover of great conversation, and of course, clever wordplay, HIListically speaking. So welcome to an empowering place where my guests share their transformational stories of trauma to triumph through health, healing, and humor. It's the ultimate brain candy as we find out who we are, how we got that way, and what it takes to be a happy and healthy grown-up. And be kind to your mind. I'm glad you're here. If you're like me, I imagine you've reflected from time to time on some sliding door moments in your life. Those what ifs and what might have beens if we had just made a different choice. How would my life be different now, you may ask? I'm talking about those split-second decisions that change everything. Now, I hear them all the time from clients, and to be completely honest and transparent, my inner voice loves to throw me a zinger now and then too. What if, what if, what if? If I didn't go to that party, I would have never met the love of my life. Goodness, if I had left 5 minutes earlier, I would have been completely caught in that traffic jam. Yeah, the list goes on and on. Sometimes they're good reflections, like the ones I just mentioned, and other times the outcome is from a door we wish we had never opened. Lis Cashin took one such door when she was just 13 years old. And sadly, so did her friend who was standing by. It was a sporting event gone wrong that led her to accidentally killing a teammate. 13. How does one process grief and guilt at that time in our lives? Or at all? Add to that an unstable home environment, abusive relationships, and toxic distractions. Yeah, punishing herself seemed to be the only way to deal with the pain and the loss. That is, until a breakthrough that changed her life forever. On this episode of HIListically Speaking, Lis shares her story on what put her on what she calls one hell of a road to happiness. So how did she do it? How did a woman who was faced with a childhood filled with trauma and tragedy become an award-winning author, a TEDx global speaker, and a mental health consultant? I imagine it's from choosing a different door. Now, let me first say that this episode could be a trigger for some, so come with an open heart and mind if you choose to continue. And if you choose to walk through this door and join us, from my heart, I can tell you this: you will leave fulfilled and inspired with a whole new set of tools for transformation. And possibly, quite possibly, a key to open a new door in your own life. Miss Lis, it is so good to see you. I really just want to start out by saying thank you for being accommodating and appreciating the fact that I needed some time and space to work through some family obligations. And I'm just really glad you're here now. So things happen when they're supposed to, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I believe, is everything happens at the right time. So maybe we would have had a different conversation back then, and we're having the conversation today that we're meant to have. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And, those couldn't be truer words, because I think you and I have had some conversations in the past where it's like trust and, putting it out there in the universe and the vibration and raising the vibration and saying everything happens for a reason sometimes is not so easy when something happens that is not so positive, which is part of the reason why I wanted to bring you on HIListically Speaking, because not all of us go through traumas. Some of us just have life events that can really put us on a path that is not so positive, or we turn it around and turn those traumas into triumphs, or those upsets into something that's more uplifting, rather. And I think your journey, as you say, you set the scene from your journey from birth to whatever it is today, where we are today, can really turn things around. And I'd love for you to just open up and share some of your story on what is This Is Me, Lis Cashin.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, it has been quite a journey, and I know some of your listeners will have been through trauma themselves, and really my whole sort of childhood was full of trauma in different ways. I had a background story of a very mentally and emotionally abusive, alcoholic step-parent. My stepdad just drank too much, and with his increase in alcohol came increase in temper, and I was often on the receiving end of that. So I sort of was growing up with this insecure background where I was questioning myself a lot because I was being blamed for things all the time. So I was really trying to be a good girl, to try and stay under the radar. And of course, in a relationship dynamic like that, it's never going to work. But as a child, you don't know that. And so I just kept trying to sort of win over his love and never being successful. So started to really plant those seeds that maybe there was something wrong with me. This was, as children do, sort of interpret these things as being something about them, or there's something wrong with them. So I already sort of had these seeds of beliefs when I became a teenager. And I used to get praise through doing lots of different sports. I used to love doing different sports. I was in the tennis team, netball, all sorts of different ways. And in the summer, I do athletics, and I was chosen to throw the javelin for my school sports team. So I used to throw in competitions and did well. But I got real praise for that. So it meant a lot to me at the time with my background, my home background and everything. So one day I was really, really excited because it was my school sports day. And I'm just going to give a trigger warning now, because some of your listeners, as I say, may have been through trauma. So just to make people aware, I'm actually just going to very briefly now mention that major trauma if they want to switch off for a few moments to practice self-care. That's
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. So I went to school really excited about the day ahead, went to lessons, came to the afternoon, took part in a couple of other events, and then came over to the javelin event and was really, really hopeful I was going to win a medal, and that really meant a lot to me. So I waited in line until I was called to throw. I did exactly as I was told to do. I picked up the javelin. There's a runner's box. I took a deep breath. I took my run up. Didn't leave the box. I did, everything was how it should have been. And then I threw the javelin as hard as it could. Unfortunately, the school had put two of my classmates out on the field to mark the throws. And there's two white lines that come out which if you throw between those lines, it's considered a valid throw. If it's out of them, it's not. But my friend was standing just right on the line to the right-hand side of me. And for some reason, she was distracted and wasn't looking. The school didn't make sure that she was looking. So when I threw the javelin, although it went straight initially, it then veered off to the right. And unfortunately, it hit her in the head. And 4 days later, she died in hospital from her injuries.
Remind me, how old were you when this happened?
13.
Just hitting teenage years when we start asking a lot of questions. And honestly, this could happen at any age, and it'll still, I imagine, would impact us in the most unbelievably, I can't even imagine. And just watching you still process this so many years later, it never quite leaves you. And I know that you don't fully tell the story because it's not so much about the action. And obviously, we don't want to re-traumatize or trigger others who might be listening, or even when you do your TEDx talks or your other speaking engagements, you don't need to know the true details to know that something happened that caused an outcome that was not positive, that was a trauma. So as a 13-year-old, facing so many emotions, I would imagine you went through a series of emotions from that, not really having the mental health tools and capacity as your brain is still growing and becoming, everything that we become hopefully as adults. How were you able to move forward with something so traumatic like that in your life? What did Lis do?
Well, I was in such intense shock. I think for years afterwards, like you say, back then, mental health wasn't even a terminology. I was asked, did I want to see a psychiatrist? And I panicked and thought that if I saw a psychiatrist, I'd never be able to get a job. That's what I thought back then, that I would be labelled as insane, and that this is the 13-year-old brain in the 1980s. So I said no. And I then thought, right, I need to pretend like I'm okay here, because otherwise I'm going to have to go and see this psychiatrist. And so I look back, and honestly, I think the strength of the human spirit really is what got me through, because I honestly couldn't tell you how I did it, except every day I got up and got through the day and continued like that. And I really, as part of my journey of recovery, really honor that younger me for having done that. She felt so deeply traumatized. She was so in shock. And not only did I think then that there was something wrong with me, I thought that I was evil. That's what I unconsciously took on as my belief, that I was evil and that I deserved to be punished. And I only discovered this, many years later in my processing, because there wasn't that help to come to terms with it. But just day to day, and of course I still had my background story with my stepdad. I wasn't sleeping. I had this rage, terror, flashbacks. It was only 4 years ago I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I've been living with it for over 30 years, but not understanding that that's what it was. So, every day I would just try and get through the day. But I think I was in so much shock. I was literally like a zombie. I was living but not alive. I was just getting through the day, and I just did that day to day, and somehow managed to get through my teenage years. I didn't get any support at all, so I couldn't talk about it at home. My stepdad forbade us to talk about it at home. We couldn't mention my friend's name. I was told at school that the teachers were all keeping an eye on me, but nobody was talking to me about it. So I felt like I was in a goldfish bowl, and the only professional support I was offered was this psychiatrist that completely terrified me at the thought of it. So, yeah, somehow the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of the human spirit, has got me through those years.
And I think that's a really strong statement, resiliency. We hear that word a lot. That word is thrown around a lot, as well as trauma. And understanding what trauma is, understanding what resiliency means, I think can really impact how we are resilient in our lives, wouldn't you say? So yeah. with this, and first let me say I'm so sorry that you had to endure that, and how fortunate we are in this day and age, and our children and our children's children, and this we live in a time where there is more that is possible and offered to support people on their emotional well-being journey, their active emotional well-being, not just emotional. So we're taking a moment to appreciate that, because there are so many people out there, the licensed professionals, the coaches and practitioners like you and I, and holding space for those, and family, and a deeper understanding to realize that mental health is so important. And it's important for us to talk about our emotional well-being and what we need to live resiliently, right? So having that lack of tools, it used to be just a guidance counselor. I mean, mental health has been around forever, right, Lis? But the support network would scare, especially a child. I mean, you're going to the counselor, you're going to the principal, you're going to the headmaster, and you're feeling like, I have to open up about this, but I can't even open it up about it in my own home. How was that for you? Was there a sense of relief when you left the home because of what you were dealing with just in the home with your own home setting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think there was, anytime I was called to speak to anyone, this panic would come up, because I hadn't processed it to any degree. And I made a real I made a real stand for myself, I think, when I was 17, after another row at home that was unfounded with my stepdad. I just thought it was like this resiliency inside, which I've had really powerfully at times in my life, just said, no more. I cannot stand this anymore. It was like a real fight for me, a real fight for my life, I think, at that point. And so I took myself to something called the Citizens Advice Bureau in the UK and just shared with them what I'd been going through, what my home situation was like. And so they took me out of the home and found me, it's called sheltered accommodation. So I was put into a council flat. So it was a funded flat for me. I didn't have to pay, which was in my nearest, largest town. So it was away from my school. It was away from my stepdad. And it was in a really bad part of town. I had a drug dealer living above me. It was really noisy. And you know what? For me, it felt like heaven. It felt like heaven. I was just like, I thought, I don't ever have to put up with that man again. And I really wanted to get my exams to go to university. I felt that really strongly. And I thought if I stayed at home, it wasn't going to happen. And so I actually did those exams while I was living out of the home and still had no help at all at this point to come to terms with the original trauma or the trauma of my stepdad, none of it. And yet I still managed to focus and get those exams and go to university. And looking back, I'm just so incredibly proud of myself for
As
doing
you
that.
should be. Oh my goodness, to make such a powerful step, to leave your home, which should be your respite, right? And there are
Yeah.
so many people that cannot call their home their respite. And it should be the one place that you feel safe and in support and love. And when you can't feel that, especially as a young adult coming into your own, I imagine that probably propelled your resiliency and independence in an entirely different way. But to come to that realization, like, I need out of this toxic situation. What was the turning point with that? Was there something that happened, if you feel like sharing, that was like, I'm out of here. This is not conducive. This is not helping me.
Yeah, it was. It had been a build up, definitely,
I
and
imagine. Yeah.
you know, I'd watched my mum have an emotional breakdown and had to sort of witness that as a result of his abusive behavior. And these arguments were escalating and just over really silly things. He would just pick a fight for no reason. And then he would, and it was, he'd then go out of the room, come back, see me cry, and then laugh at me. So it was, you know, it was horrendous. The whole thing was horrendous. And, these arguments were escalating. And then this particular argument this one night was over a train ticket. I mean, it was just stupid. I was going to visit a university the next day and I hadn't bought my train ticket, I think something like that. And he just went off, he exploded. And my mum didn't back me up. And I just thought, you know what? That's it. I've just had enough. And that was sort of the straw. It sounds like a really silly straw, but it was almost like it was the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like it'd been layering for so long. And I just thought, enough. That is it. Enough. And that prompted me. And I actually left the house and didn't come back that night. My mum then thought I'd gone and perhaps, you know, taken my life, I think. And she was trying to ring all my friends, couldn't find me. And I came back and she'd written me a letter just apologizing for not having supported me and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, but I just thought it was her decision to stay with him, not mine. I was now old enough to leave. And so I left. And I felt, you know, looking back, even saying it now, I'm just like, yes, like my own cheerleader. Like,
Yes. Don't we have to be our own cheerleaders? We have to be our own cheerleaders. And I don't mean like not having anyone else's support, but this is something I share a lot with clients and just in general conversation, just with everyday folks, is that if we're not supporting ourselves, if we're not our own cheerleader, our own coach in a way before anyone else, how in the world can we show up in this world and be supportive for others? It's the same thing with happiness. And you kind of touch on that a lot with your speaking engagements, in your book, mentioning the book, This Is Me. This is, I love this. I mean, available on Amazon, just so you know, it's called This Is Me, Lis Cashin. And it's your journey that sets the scene, that just really like creates the space, tells your story. I would imagine it was very cathartic and therapeutic to write this and put it down. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a second. I do want to remind folks, you're listening to Holistically Speaking, and my guest is the wonderful, beautiful spirit, Lis Cashin. She is just an award-winning author of the book This Is Me. She's done TEDx, and she's a global speaker. She's so passionate about mental well-being, and she, like all of us, have our own journey that bring us to this space where, if we allow it, if we just allow it, if we are our own cheerleaders, like you say, we can thrive. And we can certainly find that state of resiliency. And I'm happy to say that this podcast is also supported by Squadcast, my great friends at Squadcast. So if you are finding this interesting, if you know that this could support someone else on their journey, please pass it along just to one person. Let them know that this exists, and hopefully they will walk away. It's like I always say, that starfish story. Maybe if it just reaches one starfish, it'll make a difference. So let's make a difference to that one starfish, right?
Beautiful.
Definitely. So I do want to talk about the book a little bit, if you don't mind. When you wrote this book, This Is Me, what was your intent? And was your intent for it to even be a book? Because many times our journals wind up being the chapters of the pages of the books. We're like, why am I not publishing this for others to understand and to walk away with something?
Yeah, I wanted to write a book for years. It had been this just recurring thought. I thought, if I don't actually write this book now, it's just going to keep haunting me. It was like this repetitive idea. And so eventually, but I kind of wrote a lot of it, like you say, from journals over the years, is exactly what it's based on. And I put those together, and I thought I was ready to publish the book about 12 years ago. And all the energy was there to write the book. I very much go with my intuition and guided by where the energy flows. And I thought, yeah. And then I got to the point and I thought, okay. And then I thought, the book isn't finished. And even though I'd finished it, my intuition said, you've got to live the next bit. And so that's what happened. I then lived the next 10 years. And then I got my PTSD diagnosis. And I thought, that was such a missing piece, that I needed that in order to be able to finish the book, because it gave me that extra level of awareness about trauma and all of that that had been missing up to that point. So I then was able to finish it. But you're quite right. It was cathartic. It was painful. It was liberating. It was all of those things rolled into one. I think if you ever want to challenge yourself, write a book about your life story and then put it out for public consumption.
I love that you say that, because I'm sitting here, honestly, I learned so much from my guests, and I've been on that path of writing it down, creating the chapter, the title, all the table of contents of what I want to share. And every time I have someone on that is an author and has authored a book, whether it's self-published or they've gone with the big ones, it doesn't even matter. The fact is, the minute you put it on pages, the minute it's bound, the minute it's available online, the minute you make it public and declare it and manifest it, you're going to touch so many people. And honestly, the minute you let it go, you let it go. If it reaches people, it reaches people. If it doesn't, and it rarely doesn't, right? You're going to hit somebody with the kind of energy we're putting out there. So if anything, you're inspiring me to finish what I've been working on for so long. So thank you for the reminder.
Oh, fantastic. And yes. I realized I didn't answer your question, actually. That
it's okay.
My intention was to make a difference. Exactly like you said, the starfish, it flowed so beautifully, because I thought, if one person reads this and takes something from it, because when I was struggling all those years, I wish I'd had the book that I'd read, that I wrote, in order to guide me. I wish someone had said to me, you know what, I know it seems like you're going round in circles, but really it's a spiral, and every turn of the wheel you are making progress, even if it doesn't feel like it. Because I just kept beating myself up all the time, thinking that I should be happy, I should be further along. And well-meaning people said to me, you just need to leave it behind, it's all in the past now. And then I learned about trauma, and it's not that easy when you've been through trauma. You are literally especially with PTSD, part of your mind is literally stuck in horror and terror back in the event. So you can't just move on from it. It's hardwired into your neurology. It's not a thought even. It's like part of your whole system. So to expect you to just be able to move on from it, of course. And I was trying my hardest. That was the thing. I kept thinking I was failing. So I wanted to put all of these insights into the book so that if someone else read it and they were struggling, or even if they're just looking for inspiration, that actually they could take hope and be guided by my story to know that, keep going, trust your intuition, just keep taking the steps and the steps will appear. It's like Harrison Ford in one of his films. I don't know if you saw, when he's standing in a cave and he has to take the step and then the path appears underneath him. It's lit up. And it's only when he takes the step does the path light up. And I felt that was very much my journey.
That was Indiana Jones. And
Indiana Jones, that's
Indiana
right.
Jones, yes. And, when we think about it, filmmaking, as well as books and poetry and music, everything has a message. And I remember that the minute you said that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. And you're feeling the tension of him, like, am I going to jump? Am I not? Blah, blah, blah. And the minute he takes the jump, we feel the relief too, right? So
Yeah.
there's so much in the arts that can really make a difference, whether you're authoring, whether you're speaking in front of 5 people or 500 or 5,000, you're bound to touch somebody in some miraculous way. And you touch a lot on happiness being a choice and a commitment. And I love that. I feel the same way. And look, we have bouts where we doubt ourselves. The inner bully sits right there on our shoulders sometimes. We have to just deal with that belief system, that BS. Interesting that belief system is also BS.
Definitely.
But how were you able, or were there certain modalities or approaches you used to actually heal yourself? Because nobody has the power to heal anyone else. Heal yourself from the trauma, deal with or manage your post-traumatic stress, which I totally get that because I had that as well. How or what was really something that resonated with you that helped you, with so many modalities being out there too?
Yeah, I know. And it's definitely been a journey, but I think it started out by having the realization that I am responsible for my happiness. And I don't say that glibly. When you're going through trauma and you're in the depths of darkness, you don't feel that happiness is even a possibility. I've been there. So I understand that. But I also then learned that I am responsible. And just taking that responsibility set in motion the whole chain of events and a whole load of modalities that sort of continues to this day. But realizing I had that choice over how I felt, that was the turning point. Then I decided to go on a big traveling trip. It was a classic. I did it actually before Eat, Pray, Love came out, but it was a very similar trip along those. When Eat, Pray, Love, I was like, that was almost my trip written down. But someone gave me Reiki, so that's that form of energy healing. I was on a beach. I had no idea. Someone offered it to me. I had no idea what they were talking about. She said, I'll explain it later, but you just lie down. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm traveling. And I was completely closed. In fact, I'd been taking a lot of ecstasy and different drugs up to this point. So because I was closed off as I could be. And then she offered me this Reiki session. So I thought I'll give it a go in India. Why not? And during this session, I felt like blissful, like expansive. I almost couldn't catch my breath. It was like more powerful than any drug I'd ever taken. And she didn't even put her hands on me. And I think what happened, if you know about these things, was it was a Kundalini Awakening. I think it sort of blew my chakras wide open. I didn't even know what a chakra was back then. But that was a real turning point. I mean, I felt this connection. Up to then, I'd felt disconnected from myself, from everything. I hadn't wanted to believe in God because I was christened Catholic, and I thought there was a punishing God waiting for you when I die, and it was not going to be pretty. So I'd rejected all of that. And then suddenly I was connected to something that was connected to everything, and I was a part of it, and it was loving, and there was no dogma, and it was profound and just really shifted the whole trajectory of my life, really. From then on, I went to train in Reiki. I explored all sorts of alternative therapies. I also trained in mindfulness. I'm a mindfulness practitioner. When I came back from that trip, I became a life coach, trained in neurolinguistic programming, and, so many different modalities. And each one of them gave me something on my road to recovery, because I believe it's a mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and social recovery in all of those areas. And I've done bits in each of those areas to sort of support my own happiness and mental well-being.
That's great. The fact that you mention what holistic is, I mean, it's important because sometimes people are like, what does that mean? That you're just eating green and vegan? And it's like, no, it's so much more than that. I mean, we are so much more than our temple that we live with, like everything that lives within this body that we are so gifted to have and appreciate. It is the mental side. It is the emotional. It's the physical, the social, the spiritual, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And if we do not take care of this temple, it can have the capacity to crumble. So when you mention all these different modalities, like the Reiki, like the mindfulness, and all of it's really mindfulness, right? Energy, because we're all energy. It's so important. And I want to remind folks that, there's no one thing, right? Find what works for you. And as I love to say, put it in your mental health toolbox. Like sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver, whatever it is to put up that shelf. Sometimes you need assistance with that shelf to make it level, right? So have more tools available to you and use what you need at the time, whether it's the hammer, the screwdriver, the drill, the level, whatever. So being able to have all these different modalities at your advantage. And if something doesn't jive with you, it maybe doesn't come out of the tool shed every once in a while, right? Maybe. So this actually goes into what you're sharing with folks. And this is really great, everyone that's listening, that Lis is actually providing a 15-minute well-being hacks download. Oh, yay. That gives you 15 options. And we're going to put that on the HIListically Speaking podcast website. There'll be a link for that. Download it. Even if you use one out of the 15, hooray. And if you decide to try all 15, awesome sauce. So just we'll mention that again as we close this chapter and this conversation. But definitely look on the podcast page because that's there for you. And Lis is lovingly providing it. So thank you for that. I love it. I've looked over it. I can't wait to access it. And it's one of the reasons why I love doing this and having these kind of conversations, because I learned so much from my fellow coaches and practitioners and high vibration seekers and beers and doers. So I appreciate you being so generous with your offering. I just want to say that.
Thank you.
So moving forward, what can you kind of share with folks what they might be able to see and take away from the 15-minute well-being hacks? Maybe just give them a little taste.
Yeah, certainly. So there's a guided meditation in there. So that's something, you can, it's me guiding it. So you can just tune in whenever you like. You can do it every day or once in a blue moon. But for me, mindfulness meditation has transformed my mental well-being. So I had to put that in there. And then there's things like focusing on what you can control. Very often, especially in the past couple of years with everything that's been going on, we can be overwhelmed and we're worrying about all these, we're worrying about the global pandemic that we can't actually influence. But what we can control is getting vaccinated if we choose to. We can control social distancing, wearing a mask, all of that. So it's focusing on what you can control. So it's things like that. It's just different things that have helped me actually in my own journey to mental well-being that can support other people. And I just wanted to share from the heart something of value that people could do, especially in these difficult times.
And I would imagine things like this, the pandemic, being in this for the last 18 months, and whether we're in lockdown or opening up a little bit or just starting to embark on where are we going now that there are other things that are surfacing and we're finding out about. Did the pandemic give you time to do some inner work yourself, to be able to support yourself first, the cheerleader, and others? I mean, what did you take away from the pandemic?
I'm going to be really honest. Ever since I had my awakening all those years ago, I haven't stopped doing the work.
Right.
Yeah, if something comes up for me, I'm there. I will process it if I need to, or I'll be with it, or whatever needs to happen. So for me, it's a continual journey, but it's not a chore. I love it. It's like any part of me, I just think, oh, this is another part of me that needs love. That's all I see. If something comes and it's painful, it's just another part of me that needs love. and now I've got love to give. So, it's actually a beautiful, more and more integration of all of those parts of me that I love equally, rather than trying to reject the ones which I didn't want people to see. So the journey has continued in lockdown, but I have practices and tools like you do that support me. So I've done really well during lockdown, and have been able to support other people. So I've offered meditations for free during that time. But my business, I've never been more successful. I think, companies turned towards mental well-being. They realized they needed to support their staff during this time, or the different offerings that I offer just are very timely right now, because people are realizing that they can take responsibility for their own mental well-being, and they want to know what can they do around that. So in all of those different ways, I've been able to serve others, which is, it makes all the difference to me, is being able to share what I've learned with others. I mean, it's like the hero's journey, the archetype. For me, my happiness comes through loving myself and through serving others. It can't be one or the other. It has to be that joint way. So I've been very lucky, very fortunate that I have, been able to be so successful even during the pandemic and coming out. But I can't being how many people I'm serving.
Gosh, it's all about community, isn't it? I am so elated to know that more companies are really embracing mental and emotional well-being within the workplace. Even though many of us are working, or many companies and corporations are working from home, some are kind of gradually going back into the office. I have some clients, big clients and small ones too, that I love seeing that they have meditation rooms on their campuses. They have take a break. I mean, it reminds me going back and not too far when Arianna Huffington was talking about in her book Thrive, the companies that are embracing mental health and well-being. Take the break you need so that you're more productive, not just here, not just in the workplace, my friends, but like at home, because that's really where you need to be productive first. And I don't just mean in the home where you're sleeping in your bed, but the home, your body, your mind, your spirit, everything you just mentioned before about the well-being to holistic living, holistically speaking. So I love that you're able to do that and really grasp that. And I have to agree with you, Lis, because as someone who, I work from home unless I have clients that I need to go see, or any of the work that I do that takes me out of the home environment. The pandemic didn't really impact me like it would those who are 9-to-5ers in the office, those bridge and tunnel, bus and tunnel kind of folks. So maybe we embraced it and it raised our vibration even higher, Yeah. But I guess we all have lessons that we've learned, right?
I think we've done right. Maybe I feel like I was ready for the pandemic because I'd already been so much myself, that was almost sort of preparing me. Whereas for other people, it's a shock. And the first
it's almost like the homeschooling parents that were already homeschooling. They're like, oh, so now you see where we're coming from, right? They're laughing at all those other people. Like, how do I homeschool my child? They're like, we've been doing that forever. So it's interesting because while we might have had kind of a little, we were a little ahead on the race in some ways. There were things that I wasn't prepared for. I have to imagine that a lot of people feel that way. But I would have to say there are some things I've implemented since the pandemic. Have you made any little shifts and changes that you didn't do before?
I think technology-wise, I'm really set up. Yeah, exactly. Cameras, all sorts of different things. Green screens. I had all sorts of things that I didn't have before. That I think, initially, because some of my work was online before, but suddenly it was all of it and in different ways. So I had to tech up very quickly.
I would have to say the one thing I wish I did was invest more in the companies that make ring lights and in Zoom and microphones and Yeti. Like the companies I wish I invested in are the ones that are booming right now.
Yeah.
How do we know? How do we know? Hopefully there's people listening that are saying, oh, I did that.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So in closing, I want to play a little game with you. I do
Mm.
this every time I chat with my beautiful guests, and it's just a little word association. And what I'd like to do is just throw out a word and tell me the first word that comes to mind. Just see how
Oh
Liz is
dear.
thinking. I know I love this is fun. I do this with my students too. So
Great.
one word, just as quick as you can think. Don't even think twice about it. Okay?
Yes.
I love seeing reactions to this. Okay, here we go. Trauma,
Recovery,
resiliency,
growth,
happiness,
possible,
evil.
innocence.
Oh, that was my cat answering. Support. Thank you, Eliza.
Inclusive,
Cheerleader.
squad,
Love.
open.
Love it. Did you hear Eliza? She
I
answered.
did. Oh, the innocence. Yeah.
She's so silly. She has to be part of everything.
She's
She's seriously.
like, yeah,
What's that?
innocence. Innocence.
Yeah,
That's what.
innocence. Oh,
Wow.
she's not that innocent. Let me tell you, she knows how to manipulate the heck out of me. Anyway, that's great. I do want to give you a moment if you want to share with Holistically Speaking listeners any final words, anything you'd like for them to take away from our conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think never give up, whatever the situation, whatever the circumstances, however dark it may be. And I have been there. Is just know that things will change. This too will pass. There's always a glimmer of light. There's always a glimmer of hope. Just try and find that in the darkness. And, you know, we're so used to being in our heads and coming from our heads all the time. Actually, there's real wisdom in our hearts. And if we can really find a way to come home to our hearts, which I believe is my purpose in helping people to come home to their hearts, your heart knows the way. Your heart knows the way.
Your heart knows the way. What a beautiful way to end that conversation. I thank you. I need a reminder of that. The heart does know a way. Just be. Let it go and just be. Yeah, the heart knows a way. Because the more we practice well-being, the more we are in a state of happiness and healing and resiliency, right?
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. It was a joy. If you're ready to focus on what you can control and put those 15 well-being hacks from Liz in your mental health toolbox, click the link on the podcast page to download them now. And holistically speaking of that toolbox, I would love to share more with you about havening techniques and how you can change the landscape of your brain in just minutes. It's like having a brand new shiny key. So just head over to my website, hilaryrusso.com/havening, unlock the door to healing with me by your side, and you can even set up a complimentary discovery call and we can start the conversation. If you love social media, okay, so connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Hilary Russo. And I imagine you're here because something touched, moved, and inspired you to tune into Holistically Speaking. So consider passing it along to just one other person who may align with it as well. And make sure you never miss an episode. Just subscribe to this podcast wherever your earbuds take you, and you're in. Holistically Speaking is produced by Alan Seals with music by Lipbone Redding and recorded on Squadcast. And as always, thanks for listening. Be kind to your mind and don't forget to laugh.